Hello, welcome to the 13th and penultimate volume of the Academic Agent Retrospective. We're almost there now, folks. And this rather important volume concerns strategy and tactics. I go through tactics that are not viable for us, tactics that are viable for us, and why. You'll see the development of my idea of the network of tens, the development of the counter-elite that is necessary, and how over time I shift towards the notion of the negative vision and clearing them out. Just before we hit play, I'll remind you again that all of this week we are running little tie-in promotion on the academic agency. Use the code RETRO, that gets £100 off all of the bundles on the site. Take advantage of that while you can. Otherwise, I hope you enjoy this collection. Jim, hit play.
I've spent a long time on this channel diagnosing the problems we face, but how about solutions? From time to time people ask me about this, so here are some brief thoughts. First, you need to get into the mindset of power and think like our ideological opponents do. People on the right seem to think in terms of bottom-up mass movements, in terms of the grassroots. This is a fiction, and this thinking needs to be reversed to being a targeted elite movement, looking to capture all institutions of power. The people will be told what they believe at a later date, and this is how power really functions. Here are some bottom-up tactics that don't work. Most of the time, the successes you hear about from any of these tactics are preordained and agreed prior by those people in power. Popular protest activism only ever works if it is pushing at an open door. And so that means all of these things are a waste of time, and Lord knows we've tried. Number 1, petitions. Number 2, writing to MPs. Number 3, protests. Number 4, complaining to existing institutions. Number 5, boycotts. Number 6, griping. Number 7, forming new political parties. The issue is outlined in Thomas Sowell's Knowledge and Decisions. Each of these methods are being targeted against structures that, by their nature, do not respond to material feedback loops. The BBC were always going to protect Aristocrats against the thousands of complaints we sent them. Charlie Kirk was always going to double down on his agenda against the gripers and for his paymasters. These methods are useless, and we need not bother with them anymore. Instead, recent events have shown the following. Number 1, that the broad mass of people are cattle. And number 2, that all firepower should be directed only at the elites. Number 3, that any real anti-left movement must be a movement of elites against elites. And in light of this, I propose the following. Number 1, we need to utilise existing networks to create a Vanguard elite whose first commitment, no matter what they do in life, is to be against the cathedral, by which I mean the current globalist, leftist hegemony. The network should be both international and local. If you in real life are in some position of power or influence, you should seek to use it to further our ends. Even better, if there are 2 or 3 people in the same organisation who can work together to further those ends and to watch each other's backs and recruit more of people like themselves. If you are young, currently a student, let's say, keep your head down and get yourself into a decent position while trying to find others who think as you do and embed yourselves into the structures of power. Another good thing to do is to try to find people who are like you at a local level. Make contact with them, stay in touch, maybe seek to infiltrate your local Conservative Party group and try to gain footholds wherever you can. Don't be explicit in these aims, just seek to take what positions of power and influence there are, remembering that your commitment is to the cause and not to whatever party or organisation it happens to be. And this is how the left has managed to do what they have done, and this is the way we must counteract them. I also advocate real-life meetings and community building. As I've said before, this should not always be a political conference or an organised movement meeting, but rather should take some other form, a cover, if you will. Let's say the Basket Weaving Society. The point is ensuring that like-minded people meet on a local level with some activity or reason to get in touch, whether it's basket weaving or playing cards or whatever else. The social contact and real-life network is the key. The sense of purpose and confidence will grow out of these things naturally. Number 2, we need to aim to create vertical relationships with powerful investors who will help back Vanguard institutions. For example, the Guardian newspaper made a loss of £100,000 a day for 3 years straight. So how is the Guardian still going? The Guardian is still going because it has powerful backers and a trust fund with over £1 billion, which is basically topped up whenever they get into trouble. Our leftist enemies love to point out that the Guardian has a very small readership. It's in the region of 130,000. But what they never point out is who reads it. Everyone who matters in the UK reads it, especially the people who run the BBC. Now, whether the route to this is through Steve Bannon or some maverick Russian oligarch or Elon Musk, it doesn't matter. We will get nowhere in the long run without serious financial backing of this nature. Third, and finally, the Vanguard elite must pursue its ends using targeted special interest groups, whether it is abolishing Tony Blair's political correctness laws, or ending mass immigration, or investigating the grooming gangs, or whatever else. These things can only get anywhere if there is a concerted effort on that one issue and that one issue alone. This is how minority groups get their will over the majority. It is no good for a special interest group to push on more than one front. It must be single issue, ideally with a tangible end result. Here are some examples of tangible goals, but I'm sure you could think of others. Again, there is no point in trying to do this by appealing to the majority of people. Those people do not matter. This needs to be achieved by becoming a focused pressure group that will stop at nothing to achieve its end. So there it is. Here are some solutions that I think may get us somewhere. A single Vanguard elite is probably worth more than 100,000 normal people pledging their support. Support is fair weather. It means nothing. If you're serious about change, you need to start thinking about what you can do, how your particular skill set might come in handy. Lots of different people will have many different roles to play, and somebody like me, I'm an intellectual. I'm somebody who writes books and articles and makes videos here on YouTube. I can spread ideas. I may not be as good as some of these other organizational skills, some of these brass tacks, attracting investment, all of these sorts of things. They're not my skill set, but they may well be yours if you're watching this. And really, unless we start thinking along these lines and getting organized, all of this amounts to little more than just complaining. All right, hopefully there's some food for thought. Now get out. I'm sure by now most of you are familiar with the metaphor by Scott Adams, that people have been watching two different movies on the same screen. In short, this simply means that two groups on opposite sides of the ideological divide are watching the same events play out with different narrative perceptions of what is going on. Red people who follow red sources get their worldview reflected back at them, while blue people who follow blue sources get their biases confirmed instead. We are also by now familiar with the idea of an echo chamber. That is, that most people, most of the time, talk to people in their own ideological bubble. But even across these echo chambers, you'll note this middle space in which there is some crossover and in which everyone agrees at the very least that an event occurred. Let's say, in this case, that a tree fell over and caused some damage. However, in the past few weeks something strange has happened, which is that the two sides are no longer even watching the same screen, which is to say that the basic facts of what happened, the event so to speak, are not agreed upon. Now, if only red sources cover the fact that blue punches red, a person on the blue side sees only a version of events in which red punches blue. Now let's pretend someone from the red side tries, for example, to cross or invade the blue echo chamber and quite literally insert clips of blue punching red in his otherwise pristine blue Twitter or Facebook feed. The person from the red side is ensuring that the person from the blue side sees these things with their own eyes. But does it matter? Well, because the person from the blue side has been well trained to think like a blue, the first thing they look for is whether the source can be trusted. But oh no, the person from the red side has provided a clip that is tainted by the fact that it comes from a red source. Red bad, blue good. Need blue source to verify. Our person from the blue side will not believe what they are seeing with their own eyes unless it has been verified by another blue. But when our intrepid truth warrior goes to consult all his usual sources, the story is completely missing. There is no record anywhere to be found of blue punching red. And so the person from the blue side somehow explains away the evidence he has seen with his own eyes as being faked or fraudulent or spun in some way, because red bad, blue good. The event was that red punched blue, and that is all. Now, I would suggest that when the events in question are of great significance, this is quite a serious problem. It's been quite remarkable to see this in action during a time when everyone has a smartphone, which can instantly record and upload anything, and in which clips can go viral in seconds. We now live in a time when some people won't even admit the evidence of their own eyes. I've even seen some reports where reporters are right there on location and in their descriptions denying the very things that they are witnessing. The fabric of reality itself seems to be dissolving. I'm reminded of a play called Rhinoceros by Eugene Ionesco, in which a man in a village witnesses everyone around him, one by one, turning into a rhinoceros. When he's the only one left, he starts to doubt his own existence. And then he tries to turn himself into a rhinoceros too. He struggles, but he fails. And then, in the end, vows to fight the rhinoceroses and exclaims, "I'm not capitulating." Maybe things aren't as bad as that yet. So what do we do? How is it possible to get through to anyone who will only accept blue sources when said blue sources will not report an event? How do you speak to someone who, for all intents and purposes, has become a rhinoceros? I don't know the answer, but I'm asking you, dear viewer, to make some suggestions in the comments. These could be your own friends, family members, loved ones, your neighbours. What strategies can we utilize to confront them with reality in terms they might accept and understand? This strikes me as a vital challenge right now, because soon, and sooner than we anticipate, it will be too late. Now get out. Over the past year or so, it has become increasingly common for those who oppose the left to cry out, "We have to take back the institutions." For those of us who think tactically and strategically, there has been a split between people like myself, who believe that this task is now all but impossible, and rather than recapturing old and decaying institutions, we should simply erect new and better ones, and others who somehow believe that this is an exercise of capturing the flag. In this video, I'm going to outline exactly why I believe the task to be a near insurmountable challenge. First, let us outline exactly what and who we are talking about. Some people like to use the phrase cathedral to describe the complex of informal, by which I mean not directly political, yet institutional power that the left currently wields. I think this is a useful catch-all phrase myself, but there are other ways of mapping it, such as in this diagram. Note that it is not only our society that functions like this, but all societies, and we are chiefly concerned with what we call the non-ruling elites, and specifically the subsection called intellectuals within that. Who are these people? Well, let's list it out. Teachers, academics, civil servants, journalists, marketing and PR people, and those who work in the creative industries. These 6 broad groupings form the phalanx of the 5th column. These are the high priests of the cathedral, if you want to put it that way. If it is a game of capture the flag, then these are 6 flags that must be captured. In the UK, there are over 500,000 teachers. In the US, 3.2 million. In the UK, there are over 215,000 academics. In the US, over 790,000. In the UK, there are 430,000 civil servants. In the US, over 2.79 million. In the UK, there are 73,000 journalists, and in the US, it's around 150,000. In the UK, there are over 195,000 people who work in marketing or PR. In the US, it's over 623,000. And finally, in the UK, there are over 2 million people working in the creative industries, and in the US, over 3.48 million. To add that all up, that's over 3.4 million people in the UK, or 5.14% of the total population. And in the US, it's over 8 million, or 2.89% of the total population. Interestingly, the intellectuals of the non-ruling elite in America are ever so slightly more elite than those in the UK. Now let's assume, super generously, that at least 10% of these people are natural conservatives, and that another 25% are simply careerists or NPCs. That is, people who will just go along with the current flow of things no matter which way the wind blows. That still leaves 2.2 million people in the UK and over 7.1 million people in the USA. What are you going to do with these people? Send them to re-education, fire them all, and then replace them with who? I do not see any viable plan for, quote, taking back institutions that are stuffed full of the core supporters of leftism. The ranks of the Extinction Rebellion protesters, for example, I would bet are nearly exclusively drawn from the ranks of these 9 million people. One would expect near African dictator levels of support for the Labour Party or the Democrats in America if you polled only 9 million people or so. As long as the state is involved in education, I do not see this situation changing without the use of blunt, draconian and practically McCarthyist government edicts or, frankly, armed insurrection and Jacobin-style reckonings, neither of which is realistically going to happen. And, even if it did, where are the 9 million conservatively minded teachers, academics, civil servants, journalists, marketing and creative people going to come from? This is a 30 or 40-year project minimum, and that is assuming that the political edict comes tomorrow, which it will not. Currently, those who scream, take back the institutions, seem to think it is as easy as changing a law or two. It is not. While no doubt legal changes are absolutely necessary, you are still left with the practical problem of needing to fill the void of non-ruling elites. You cannot expect 9 million people to have en masse road to Damascus conversions. This is why I advocate parallelism, simply put, to erect alternative anti-institutions and to rely on market forces to drain the cathedral of its power. An anti-institution should be all of the things that an institution is not: agile, diffuse, hard to pin down, cutting edge, decentralized. Go your own way whenever you possibly can. Yes, they will resort to the use of hard power to try to stop such efforts eventually, but provided there is enough scale, that is an uphill struggle for them, akin to the war on drugs or the war on terrorism, that will and can never be won. Hydras have many heads, as they say. The way to drain power from the cathedral is to deny it oxygen or attention. Okay, so the Oscars are woke. Let them slide into irrelevance. Okay, so your local state school is pushing critical race theory. Don't send your kids to it. Starve these institutions of funding wherever and whenever possible. Prestige relies on perception and perception only. The incentives can only change when belonging to a cathedral institution evokes disdain rather than status for most people. This has already happened in journalism. That's why you're watching me and not CNN. But it has not yet happened in the other strongholds. Education is the one in direst need of direct competition, and for the past few months I've seen most conservatives clamouring to get the 3.7 million leftist teachers in Britain and America back into the classrooms to indoctrinate their kids some more. The scale of the problem is massive, and there is no quick fix here. Those who oppose the left need to build up alternative structures so that there is an alternative elite ready to cycle in if and when the time comes. This cannot happen at present because there are simply not the numbers. We are talking between 3 and 5% of the population who must not only oppose the left as a core value, but also have the necessary skills of disseminating information, skills of perception management, propaganda, and so on to take over. Otherwise, you can issue every edict and diktat you want top down, but the same 9 million people I've been talking about will still be there, on the ground subverting every measure you pass. Only now they might keep their leftism hidden from plain sight. It still won't do. Now I understand the objection from many that we simply do not have the time for all of this. Other realities which cannot be ignored mean that the clock was already ticking yesterday, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And it may well be the case that, as W.B. Yeats once said famously, things fall apart, the centre cannot hold. But even in that scenario, where things balkanize, the new regime will still require a non-ruling elite due to the eternal laws of power. So in any scenario, we need to be thinking along these lines. There needs to be a bulwark of said non-ruling elites who have alternative values. Be sure to like this video and subscribe, and if you really like my content, maybe consider joining the channel or donating or maybe even buy a mug. I am grateful for all of your support. Now get out.
And the internet is now carries the flag of being subversive and possibly rebellious and chaotic, nihilistic, and oh yes it is. Forget about the Microsoft element. The monopolies do not have a monopoly, maybe on programs.
What you like about the what you like about it is the fact that anyone can say anything. But what is it specifically about the internet? I mean, anybody can say anything, and it all adds up to what? I mean, it seems to me there's nothing cohesive about it in the way that there was something cohesive about the youth revolution in music.
Oh, but absolutely, and because I think that we, at the time, up until at least the mid-70s, really felt that we were still living under the, in the guise of a single and absolute created society, where there were known truths and known lies, and there was no kind of duplicity or pluralism about the things that we believed in. That started to break down rapidly in the 70s, and the idea of a duality in the way that we live. There are always 2, 3, 4, 5 sides to every question. That the singularity disappeared, and that, I believe, has produced such a medium as the internet, which absolutely establishes and shows us that we are living in total fragmentation.
You don't think that some of the claims being made for it are hugely exaggerated. I mean, when the telephone was invented, people made amazing claims.
I
for
know
it.
the
NDVs,
president,
for example.
the president at the time when it was first invented, he was outrageous. He said he foresaw the day in the future when every town in America would have a telephone. Now how dare he claim like that? Absolute bullshit. No, you see, I don't agree. I think the internet, I don't think we've even seen the tip of the iceberg. I think the potential of what the internet is going to do to society, both good and bad, is unimaginable. I think we're actually on the cusp of something exhilarating and terrifying.
Throughout history, warfare has been a constant. Significant advantages in both technology and tactics have usually won the day. We are currently living through an information war, and I believe that this is destined to lead to a revolution, because it is we, the insurgents, who have superior technology and tactics in the 21st century. As David Bowie was discussing, the internet was a game changer in how information was distributed. Suddenly a homogeneous, centralized system became heterogeneous and decentralized. Now the old order does operate in this decentralized world, but they are still, so to speak, plugged into the mainframe using an outdated set of tactics devised in the early 20th century. Meanwhile, the new emergent order is truly decentralized and off the grid. We are nominally plugged into the mainframe in so much as this video you're watching will be streamed from a server owned by Big Tech, but there are countless ways around this, and Big Tech's control of the server is completely unimportant, as I'm about to explain. First though, let us examine the outmoded set of tactics being used by the old order and why they are destined to fail against the new emergent order. Edward Bernays wrote the book Propaganda in 1928. In it, he discusses how propaganda is the executive arm of the invisible government. Now, what was novel in 1928 was the idea that the, quote, invisible government was not simply the government itself, but also private companies, universities, newspapers, and so on that are not formally part of the government. Each of these is a powerful node of propaganda which work on individuals who falsely believe their everyday choices to be theirs and theirs alone, rather than the effect of cunning propaganda techniques perpetuated by invisible dictators. Let us examine some of the standard tactics in the Edward Bernays playbook, and hopefully it should become clear how the old order is still very much playing by it, which is why they are currently losing, and losing badly, in the information war. The first tactic outlined by Bernays is the celebrity endorsement. Think of all the Hollywood actors and celebrity mouthpieces who have been arrayed against Donald Trump since 2016. Here in Britain, similar forces spoke in unison against Brexit. They were ignored 4 years ago, and again in 2020, they were ignored. Regardless of the outcome of the current legal battles, 10.1 million more people voted for Donald Trump this year than 4 years ago. The power of the celebrity endorsement has terminally cratered. No one cares about what they have to say but the very lowest information people. Which brings us to the second key Bernays play, the trusted journalist. Bernays pioneered the method of embedding propaganda for certain products and causes in newspapers, which were ostensibly just telling people the news, but in actuality quietly controlling their thoughts. In 2020, the trusted journalist seems like a quaint and antiquated joke. Here in Britain, the last man standing, Andrew Neil, for many people the last trusted journalist in the country, is currently torching his reputation in real time by spreading open falsehoods. One of the reasons journalists are so powerless in the current information war is because the vast majority of them simply repeat what they are told by the big press agencies such as AP and Reuters. They no longer go and find the news, they are told the news and then regurgitate it. The third Bernays special is the old trick of the science says. In 1928, Bernays was the first ad man to harness the trust in science to sell products for his clients. Think of the man in the white lab coat telling you that this or that brand of detergent is scientifically proven to remove stains. This is classic Bernays. Now, since 2016 effectively nuked celebrities and journalists as trusted sources for large swathes of the population, the old order has used the pandemic to shift to one of its last standing bastions: trust the science. But there is some evidence that even this is now failing. This is Her Majesty's Department of Health and Social Care trying to correct an article with a pronouncement. Check out the ratio. The number of people arguing with the Department of Health and Social Care outnumbered the number of people who passively liked their scientific pronouncement by an order of 9-1. The science says struggles to cut it when people can read statistics for themselves. Which brings us to Bernays' last tactic, which is also the old order's last line of defence. This is the world of just straight state officialdom, the final face of authority. As Trump has refused to concede the election due to what he alleges to be a rampant electoral fraud, the old order has attempted to bombard you with stories of officials condemning Trump, former CIA directors, state secretary of this or that, lower court judges, former army generals, business leaders, former presidents. You name it, they are appealing to each and every official authority figure they can find. And it's not working. When you zoom out, you see that all four of the key areas on which the old order has depended using the Edward Bernays playbook all amount to the same thing: an appeal to authority. It seems to me that, regardless of what even happened in this election, they are destined to lose on every front. It is because they underestimate the power of the decentralized network, who can be sent to work just by following clues that a figure like Donald Trump sends them. The old order thinks censorship can work because in their world, taking out high-profile celebrities and journalists is a significant blow. But in the decentralized world, taking out any given node means nothing at all. The old order could not possibly anticipate, for example, Vince K. from Switzerland. Take a look at this.
What we did was, as you said, we checked people from the voter rolls. We first checked for people in a certain age, just because to make the search a little bit easier, because when we query the databases, it takes time since we can only do a certain request a second. And so we checked an age bracket, and we checked for people that were voter status active. So they were active voters. And of those people, we checked the obituaries, and we found lots of dead people. And we also checked that with other data, the ballot tracking system, to see that they have received ballots and that the ballots were sent in. It started like this. The very first data set was actually we're starting doing queries, and we found people that had been registered for Republican, but their party one status, basically the last status change, was a D, and we found about 40,000 people that were changed from Republican to Democrat. I then started cold calling people from that list, and the reaction was quite strong, quite violent. People told me to fix it or to change it. People thought I was calling from the government. I explained to them that I was just checking and just doing this research. So that was my first attempt to contact people. Then I contacted people from the GOP themselves because the media was not responding at all.
Now, Vince K. is just one of millions of dedicated foot soldiers in the information war around the world. Let us return to tactics and strategy. Does it really matter if Vince K. is somehow taken out? Well, not really. I mean, losing his drive and dedication would be a small loss for sure, but his place could be taken by any of you. No, none of us had even heard of Vince K. until yesterday. The old order cannot simply replace the trust built up in a man like Andrew Neil once it is lost, but the new emergent order can replace one anonymous node with another extremely quickly. And it is this field advantage in the current struggle that will ultimately win the day. How can it not lead to a revolution?
If you like Academic Agent's content on this channel, sign up for a course on the Academic Agency. He's now offering Foundations of Economics. Click the link in the show description and level up your econ knowledge.
Be sure to like this video and subscribe, and if you really like my content, maybe consider joining the channel or donating or maybe even buy a mug. I am grateful for all of your support. Now get out.
We live at a moment in which getting to the truth is more important than it has ever been, and yet the hurdles to overcome in order to find the truth are probably greater than they have been at any time for the past 100 years. In this video, I'm going to outline 10 general strategies, or rules if you want, in order to help you find the truth. And the first rule is this: assume anything you were taught about history in formal education, that's whether at school or at university, was propaganda designed to foster, at best, the idea that liberal democracy is an enlightened end state for history, and at worst, social democracy or socialism as the end goal of society. In any case, it is a view of history that denigrates the past as ignorant, superstitious and bigoted, and that upholds the present as all-knowing, enlightened and tolerant. Now, the reason why this is the number one rule is because this is the norm. This is the waters that we swim in, so to speak. This is, the mode in which you have lived your entire life. So you have to make a constant mental effort to remind yourself of the ideological bubble in which you have grown up. Now, there are all sorts of beliefs that you hold that you don't even think twice about questioning. I'll give you an example. How about the idea that in the 17th and 18th centuries, people in Europe went wild, just burning women as witches for absolutely no reason whatsoever? These poor crones were just accused of being witches for no reason by a superstitious and ignorant population kept low by that evil which is religion. But is that true? This is a list of all of the women who were burnt at the stake in the 1700s in England, and as you can see, most of them were accused of murdering their husbands, or else for counterfeiting coins. So there's usually more to something than you've been told in school or university. The second rule is your basic assumption about the people of the past should be that they knew what they were doing and made laws for good reasons, not that they were backwards or barbaric. So this is simply the flip side of the previous rule, and it holds that you should be as charitable as possible to the people of the past. Something which doesn't pass the common sense sniffed test, such as, populations just randomly started killing people for absolutely no reason whatsoever, should be investigated with this in mind. Third, treat with automatic suspicion any book that is promoted by mainstream culture. I'll give you a good example. A year or two ago, this book Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari was doing the rounds. You could seldom go on the London Underground without seeing somebody read this book. And yet, why is it that this book was so heavily promoted and praised by people in The Guardian? Well, you can figure that out for yourself, but I would just treat it with automatic suspicion for the very reason that it was being promoted at all. Number 4. Wherever possible, consult books written before 1945 and assume they are more reliable than books written after 1945. The closer that they are to the present time, the less reliable the book. Now, why have I picked that date, 1945? The reason is because that is the start of what I call the boomer truth regime, which basically subordinates truth and everything else to the narrative that liberal democracy is the highest good. Surely now, in 2020, we have learnt how far from reality that claim is, and we are seeing the boomer truth regime coming to its end. You have to assume most things written in support of the Boomer truth regime were lies. So that is why I say consult books written before 1945. Fifth, if the official explanation for something is they were just evil, be sure to read the person concerned in their own words. One of the main tactics of the cathedral is to stop you investigating things by tainting something too much with a label such as this, to put you off, to put it beyond the pale. And I would say that this is something that you need to overcome in order to confront whatever the truth is. And while I do not include in this people like, serial killers or somebody you find out was a paedophile or something like this, I would include various leaders and dictators who have been written off as irredeemably evil, including somebody like Stalin, for example. He wrote plenty. Read him in his own words. Now, this is not to say, of course, that he was not evil, but simply if you were really trying to get to the bottom of a matter, it's best to actually see what the person thought they were doing in their own terms. Sixth, if something is banned or censored, that's a good reason to read it. Again, the primary tactic of the powers that be is to try to stop you looking at something for whatever reason, and if they've taken the additional step of formally banning or censoring it, that is to raise the entry barrier even further, to make you actually fearful or trepidatious about approaching that material, to put it not just beyond the pale, but to actively prohibit it. Pretty good indication there's something they don't want you seeing in there. Number 7, never count out the possibility that official records have been destroyed or falsified. Give you an example of this. The 1890 census, the US American census, is mostly not available, the original data for it, because they were allegedly damaged in a fire in the basement of the Commerce Building in Washington, D.C. And then later on, if you carry on reading this, the United States government ordered the destruction of the remaining available data from the 1890 census. The surviving original 1890 census records were destroyed by government order by 1934 or 1935. Now, what does that mean? That means that the actual data that is presented in history books from the 1890 census is very likely not an accurate reflection of how many people were living here or of the demographic realities on the ground. That also means that arguments that are built on the assumption that that data is accurate are likely also starting from false premises. Number 8, if a story has been turned into a film, the version that the film gives is likely to be the exact opposite of what happened. By that I mean the people presented to you as heroes are likely in real life to have been the villains, and vice versa. Number 9. Anyone that comes to you pre-smeared by the press or their Wikipedia entry is probably on to something. And number 10. If a teacher or professor presents you both sides of an argument, assume they are both wrong and move beyond the containment. It is likely, even if your teacher or professor does not know it, that both sides of the argument being presented to you are prepackaged and safe and designed almost entirely to keep you within a certain Overton window. No actual thinking can be done in that frame. This is also likely to be the case for most debates that you see hosted by the mainstream media, certainly in the past 5 years at any rate. So these are 10 rules or pointers or tips that I would give you to help you find the truth. Now, if you have any techniques or rules that you use yourself like this, I encourage you to let everybody else know about it in the show notes. Anybody seeking the truth rather than seeking status or chasing reputation or anything like that We'll be grateful for any help you can give them.
If you like Academic Agent's content on this channel, sign up for a course on the Academic Agency. He's now offering Foundations of Economics. Click the link in the show description and level up your econ knowledge.
Be sure to like this video and subscribe, and if you really like my content, maybe consider joining the channel or donating or maybe even buy a mug. I am grateful for all of your support. Now get out.
If you like Academic Agent's content on this channel, sign up for a course on the Academic Agency. He's now offering Foundations of Economics. Click the link in the show description and level up your econ knowledge.
Hello everyone. This video is going to be about why, in my view, the slippery slope is not a fallacy. I'm actually making this video as a kind of favour to my friend Radical Liberation, who wanted a video that he could just point to rather than having to explain this again and again when he's talking to people. So Radlib, this one is for you, buddy. All of the examples I'll be giving you today are taken from the book A Concise Introduction to Logic by Patrick J. Hurley and Laurie Watson. Now, the reason that I was talking about this at all is because I wrote a course, which you can purchase from the academic agency, called Foundations of Logic. And when I was putting that course together, I became increasingly dissatisfied with a lot of these modern textbooks. So if you do take Foundations of Logic, you will not find this book by Hurley and Watson anywhere on the reading list, because all of my recommendations come from, or most of them come from before 1945, where you don't get this sort of thing as much. So anyway, as it is stated in A Concise Introduction to Logic, the slippery slope fallacy has this form: if A, then B; if B, then C, and so on and so forth; if Y, then Z. So the slippery slope tends to be an argument where you say, well, if you take one small step, then it's going to snowball eventually until you get catastrophic consequences. So before we get into the various examples here, first I think it's important, especially for newcomers to this channel, to note that I make absolutely no value judgments at all in this analysis. I am simply looking at the underlying logic. So it does not actually matter if you have a particular stance on any of these issues that we're going to look at here, some of which are quite contentious and some of which are considered beyond the pale in 2021, because some of them are historical examples, as you'll see. And also, one thing to note before we get into the examples, it's worth remembering that an argument can be both logically valid and untrue, or an argument can also be logically invalid and true. So anyway, the first argument they use as an example of the slippery slope fallacy is this one: immediate steps should be taken to outlaw pornography once and for all. The continued manufacture and sale of pornographic material will almost certainly lead to an increase in sex-related crimes such as rape and incest. This, in turn, will gradually erode the moral fabric of society and result in an increase in crimes of all sorts. Eventually, a complete disintegration of law and order will occur, leading in the end to the total collapse of civilization. And there were many people in history who made arguments like this. For example, in this country, Mary Whitehouse made an argument with this, not even with pornography. She was trying to get sexually explicit material taken off BBC and ITV television. She just wrote letters and encouraged other people to write letters to television bosses to get certain shows taken off air. Now, one of the reasons that the slippery slope warrants special attention is because slippery slope arguments like this have a habit of coming true. And again, it doesn't actually matter whether you support a ban on pornography or not. I would warrant that the large majority of the audience of this channel, being libertarians like my friend Radical Liberation, would not support such a ban. But let's just have a look at what's happened since the time that Mary Whitehouse was making her arguments in the 1960s and the 1970s? Well, one of the things that Mary Whitehouse argued against is that if you keep on depicting LGBT sorts of issues on the television, and if you encourage it in schools, which she was against, you will get an increase in the number of LGBT people in society. And it just so happens that there has been such an increase. In fact, from 1.6% of people now to 2.2% of people, which overall is a 37.5% increase, not insignificant, and if you were Mary Whitehouse, not at all surprising. Let us continue. Another part of this argument was STD rates. Well, they have increased dramatically since 1950, and interestingly, more liberal areas such as London have higher rates. And there's been a huge increase in the number of STDs in this country. And now, let us get to the more extreme example. If you remember, in the example from the logic textbook, they'd say, well, an increase in pornography would also increase the number of sexual offences. Well, did that happen? Let's have a look. I have taken all of these numbers from the Office of National Statistics. They are numbers for England and Wales. So the Office of National Statistics only includes the raw data and the population. I have had to work out the sexual offences per 1,000 myself. But in 1901, there was about 1.5 thousand sexual offences out of a population of 32.5 million, well, which works out as a per 1,000 rate of 0.05. If you have a look by 1961, and I think everybody would agree there was more porn about in 1961 than there was in 1901, you have, it jumps up to 20.4 thousand, which is a sexual offences per 1,000 rate of 0.4. So that's a huge increase from 1901 just there. And everybody would agree that Britain, England and Wales were more socially and sexually liberal in 1961 than they were in 1901. And then 30 years later, in 1991, it's jumped up to 29.4 thousand. The per 1,000 rate is 0.6. And if we look at last year, the data cuts off in March 2020. So it's from March 2019 to March 2020. So that predates any COVID restrictions or lockdowns. The number of sexual offences was 162.9 thousand out of a population of 56 million for England and Wales, which is a per 1,000 rate of 2.9. So if you want to have a look how it has increased from 1901, that's a 10.1 thousand percent increase in the raw offences and a 5.7 thousand percent increase in the per 1,000 rate. Now, for those of you who are against pornography bans, you're probably falling over yourselves thinking, well, probably pornography is not the reason. There's some other reason. Or you're trying to explain away the figures. You're trying to say, well, maybe the 1901 figures aren't accurate. But forget all of that. The fact of the matter is that reality has fit the path of the person who's made the slippery slope argument, and it has not fit the path of the people that they were fighting against. And we'll return, and this is just the empirical data. I will return to the underlying logic and why it's not a fallacy in a second. But I think you'd all agree that in every area, whether it's the number of LGBT people in society, whether it's the total STD rates, or whether it's the number of sexual offences, they're all up in the pornography age versus ages where people were more socially and sexually conservative, like the end of the Victorian era there. That is beyond doubt. So those are the facts. If you're trying to explain away the facts, you have to then think, well, why am I doing that? Just stop yourself questioning the facts, and let's think more about now, is the slippery slope a fallacy? Let's have another look at another example here. It was quite interesting to me that all of the examples in the textbook happen to be what I describe as liberal, progressive type issues. So the argument provided here is today, women want the vote. Tomorrow they'll want to be doctors and lawyers. And then combat soldiers, give them that, and before long they'll insist on taking the initiative in sex. If you want to protect the very meaning of masculinity, you must deny them suffrage. Well, again, this is a pretty extreme, slippery slope argument, but I mean, I don't even need to pull up data to show you, well, did women become doctors and lawyers? Yes. Is there a push for women to be combat soldiers in 2021? And has there been for the past 30 years? Yes. Was there not a huge push to, for women to embrace their sexuality and to take the initiative in sex in the 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s? Yeah, I mean, yes, all of these things did happen, didn't they? And has there been an attack on the notion of masculinity in the past 100 years, or in the past 50 years, or in the past 10 years? I mean, the answer is obvious. Yes. In fact, the rate of testosterone in the world, the levels of testosterone worldwide have plummeted. And in the West in particular, there are record numbers of men who now either identify as women or who want to be women or who dress up as women. I mean, these things are all happening. Those are the facts of the matter. Now, you may agree with women's suffrage. That's not in question here. The question is, was the person who made that initial argument correct or not? They were correct. All of those things happened. So again, we will return to the underlying logic in a second. Is it really a fallacy? So here is the final and perhaps the most controversial example that they provide in the textbook. This is from N.L. Rice in 1845. He says, then a coloured man might be the next governor of states having a black majority, and coloured men might constitute their legislature and sit on the bench as judges in their courts. Thus the entire administration in those states would be placed in the hands of degraded men, wholly ignorant of the principles of law and government. Now, obviously, there is an issue with Rice's argument here, which is not part of the slippery slope argument. The problem with his argument is his assumption that just because somebody is black, it means that they would be degraded or be ignorant of the principles of law and government. So we have to say, well, that's a racist assumption right there, and it's not necessarily the case. But that's not a fault of the slippery slope argument. That's just because N.L. Rice in 1845 probably had those racist attitudes. So let's ignore that part and think about the other part of his argument, which is if you grant black men the vote, you're then going to have black people in positions of power and serving as judges. Well, did that happen? I mean, yes. Clarence Thomas sits on the Supreme Court. Raphael Warnock has recently became a senator in the state of Georgia, which flipped blue for the first time. And, the demographic makeup of that state was a lot to do with how that vote went. And, of course, Barack Obama has been the president. And again, it doesn't matter what your personal feelings are about any of these people or about the question of suffrage. Your personal views don't matter when it comes to assessing the logic. The question is, was N.L. Rice correct in his underlying argument? And certainly, as in the other cases that we've looked at, the facts have borne out his argument in the fullness of time. So what is the problem then? What is the missing part of the argument, and how can we make sure that if you are going to make an argument which is a slippery slope argument, that it doesn't fall foul of being called a fallacy? Well, it strikes me that all these arguments are missing is the unstated assumption that people respond to incentives. This is something that anyone who studies economics understands instantly. It's just missing a premise, that's all. So if I was to state the argument in modus ponens, it would be something like this. if people are given an incentive to increase behavior X, then behavior X will increase. People have been given an incentive to increase behavior X, therefore behavior X will increase. And that is the argument that will make it work. Of course, you may need further chains in the reasoning, but you can just keep on piling up the modus ponens. So if A then B, A therefore B, if B then C, B therefore C, and so on and so forth. Or if you prefer, we can state the argument as a categorical syllogism. So incentives increase certain behaviors. This measure contains an incentive, therefore this measure will increase certain behaviors. And this is stated in Aristotle's favourite canon, the first canon. So it's a pretty watertight argument in terms of its logical form. And that looks like this. M is P, S is M, therefore S is P. And if you need many parts and many chains of the argument, you can chain that indefinitely. A is C, C is B, therefore A is B. C is D, therefore B is D. C is E, C is F, C is G, C is H, therefore A is H. If you need more parts in the so-called slippery slope argument, you just do it like that. And of course, C in this argument is the incentives. That's our missing middle term there, which is of course missing from most of the examples of slippery slope fallacies as they are stated, because when people make arguments in the real world, they often don't write them out formally in this way. Although if you did make N.L. Rice or Mary Whitehouse or any other person write out their argument in full, I'm sure they would come to something like the missing middle here, incentives. Finally, I just want to mention that the reason that the slippery slope so-called fallacy deserves special attention is because unusually for logic it has a political dimension. And this is even admitted in the logic textbook by Hurley and Watson. They say the fallacy is usually committed to defend the status quo. So by their definition, there's something inherently conservative about the slippery slope fallacy, because you're trying to dissuade some course of action from taking place, using the slippery slope as a kind of warning. And therefore, to point out that there is such a thing as the slippery slope fallacy plays into progressive hands. Now, given that we live in a progressive moment, the status quo, as we find ourselves in 2021, is a progressive status quo. This may actually turn about. You may find progressives start using the slippery slope fallacy against radical conservative arguments. Who knows? But it doesn't really matter which side of the fence you're on. What matters is whether it is a fallacy or not. And the fact of the matter is that not only have most slippery slope arguments in history turned out to be absolutely true in the fullness of time, but also if you fill in the missing middle, if you just supply the unstated premise, which you do in most other cases if you're going to be intellectually charitable, you steelman the argument, you put it in its strongest form, then it's not a fallacy at all. It's just a prediction based on the fact that people respond to incentives. All right, hopefully this will be useful for RadLib and for everyone else. If you'd like to learn more about logic, I have a whole course on it called Foundations of Logic. I also have a recent course called Foundations of Rhetoric, which breaks all of those rules, which I'd also encourage you to check out, and indeed the other part of the Trivium Foundations of Writing. And here's a little ad to tell you more about it.
Now available at the Academic Agency. Sharpen your analytical mind and your argumentation skills with Foundations of Logic. The course draws on the ancient wisdom of traditional logic that students learned for over 2,000 years, from the time of Aristotle through to the medieval schoolmen, right down to the 20th century. Sign up now for a free preview lecture.
Be sure to like this video and subscribe, and if you really like my content, maybe consider joining the channel or donating, or maybe even buy a mug. I am grateful for all of your support. Now get out. Recently, there has been a debate between two emerging factions on our side of things. which the distributist has dubbed Aristocrats and Plebians. The aristocrats prefer a top-down, indirect approach focused on fostering elites through parallelism and not engaging the left head-on. Their thinking tends to be drawn from NRX theory. The plebeians prefer a more conventional bottom-up approach, fighting the left through grassroots activism. They tend to accuse NRX types of cowardice and wanting to do nothing. The roots of this debate go back many months, but an early iteration of it took place on my cigar stream back in September. That was episode 49, Strategy and Tactics, in which Don the Pleb, aptly representing the plebeians, took on myself and Charlemagne, who were more on the elite side of things. Distributist has long been on this side of things as well. Now, more recently, on Cigar Stream 78, Yiz the Eunuch took on what she perceived as Panama Hat's pacifism in advocating Ride the Tiger as a strategy, which is, I would say, closely related to the first of these two approaches. And there was a rehash of sorts of the debate that we'd had earlier. Now, following that stream, the distributist then made a 3-hour critique of the state of play, during which he levelled most of his points at Don the Pleb, who then responded with a 1-hour stream of his own. I have linked all of these old episodes in the saga in the show notes, and I do not wish to misrepresent anyone here, so you can watch them all in their own words, and I'd encourage you to go and check them out, because many interesting points are made in those streams and videos. What I want to give you here is my take on the core nature of the disagreement, at least as I see it. I wanted to go through this slowly, spelling out ABCs and basics, because it will make it easier to see what, if anything, Don or Yiz disagree with. First, I have abstracted society into elites, those on top of the boxes there, institutions, those are the boxes themselves, and then plebs, which are the mass of people below. Now first, some key NRX 101 talking points. These talking points are drawn chiefly from the canon of thinkers I have talked about endlessly on this channel. James Burnham, the Italian elite theorists Pareto Mosca and Robert Michels, Bertrand de Jouvenel, Carl Schmitt, Paul Gottfried, many others, which were repackaged in a more internet-friendly form by Mencius Moldbug and other NRX writers. I'd encourage you not to see Moldbug as anything more than a gateway to this set of thinkers and their understanding of power and its functioning. So the first core NRX talking point I want to cover here relates to those black boxes you see, the institutions, and the idea that they are in any way neutral. They are not neutral, and they never will be neutral. They work in the service of a particular ideology. Let's call that ideology Globo Homo, and let's give it the colour blue. There are no neutral institutions. There is no institution, be it a university, museum, political party, corporation, branch of the state or civil service, local or Supreme Court, that is not blue in colour. This is not just the case in 2021, it has always been the case, or at least it has been the case since about 1945 and the birth of what I call the Boomer Truth Regime, though one could make a strong case for it starting earlier than that, maybe as far back as the 1890s, or some people will even push it back earlier again. Now, because of this, the entire gravitational pull of the establishment on our system is towards blue. Cthulhu always swims left, as someone once said. The idea that institutions, including things like the Federalist Society or the US Supreme Court or Constitution are somehow neutral or special or immune from this particular rule is a boomer delusion, which must be shattered into a million pieces. Another such delusion is the idea that society and its elites split into two groups, blue and red, with red people and institutions and blue ones. This too is an utter fiction. The red elites and institutions are a sham, a false opposition, a total nonsense maintained entirely to give the impression that plebs have a choice or a say in anything at all. This is what Mollberg dubbed the outer party. The plebs have no say, and there is no realistic red option. There are no red elites as things stand. Thus, a much more accurate picture of the state of play is as follows. The elites, the institutions, and the vast majority of the plebs are blue in colour. Normicons and Tory voters and GOP establishment figures and Fox News hosts, the vast majority of them are blue. Now they come with a coat of paint, a thin, cheap layer of red paint on which you don't particularly need to scratch that hard to reveal the blue underneath. In Britain this is much more naked because the Tory party has given up any pretense of standing for anything but its own power and the total capitulation to the left's demands on all fronts. In the US, Donald Trump helped expose the extent to which this has also been true of the Republicans as well. Perhaps I am mistaken, but this is where it seems to me that there is some disagreement between myself and Don and Yiz, because Don and Yiz seem to want to use the existing institutions to bring about a situation like this, where you convert all the plebs, elites and institutions to red using a combination of people power and pressure through the institutions. Now I will not speak for distributist, Charlemagne or anyone else, but my view is that this game is entirely off limits. The system doesn't want red, the system will not brook red, the system would sooner drop all its pretenses and start a crisis of legitimacy and even a world war or two than allow red a genuine grip on any of its levers of power. Furthermore, this situation right here, in which you attempt to take institutions and convert swathes of plebeians into being red plebeians, is the wrong game to begin with. Why? Because all regimes, everywhere and always, all throughout history, are top-down. All political movements that ever got anywhere at all were top-down. All popular movements that seemed driven by plebeians were actually astroturfed and driven by elites. Think of Greta Thunberg. If you look at popular protest across history, it is Greta Thunberg's all the way down. What the plebeians think, quite simply, does not matter. The Overton window isn't set by plebs and normies. It is set by elites and for elites. An issue can have as little as 1% buy-in from plebs and still be pushed through by elites. And within a decade or so, it will be what the average person thinks. Now, Don, to his credit, he understands this. He's pointed it out many times. He says Andrew Breitbart was wrong. You know, it's not that politics is downstream from culture. It's that culture is downstream from law. The average person is little more than glorified livestock to the extent that their view affects anything at all. The proof of this can be seen in any issue, from the election last year to immigration or anything else you care to pick. The plebs' role is to consume product and to be shunted around like trucks by non-ruling elites who police the boundaries of the discourse in the service of power. The pleb may also be pressed into service to rubber stamp a leader every 4 years or so with a nominal vote. In fact, Who they actually vote for scarcely matters, but the pretense maintains at least the illusion of popular sovereignty. Actual sovereignty rests with minority special interest groups who have more power than any government. Corporations increasingly do bidding on behalf of those interest groups. You can ask Katie Hopkins about that. Just as governments do bidding on behalf of corporations. Any idea of a separation between the government, the state, big business, the media, and the courts or the police must be collapsed. The idea that these are distinct spheres with distinct competing powers is another boomer fiction. In the final analysis, they all serve Cthulhu. So faced with these realities of the situation as we find it in 2021, and with the realities of how power has functioned all through history in mind, what did Pareto say? History is the graveyard of aristocracies. What is my proposal? I believe Charlemagne and distributists have similar, if not identical, ideas. Well, first, forget the idea of mass conversion of normies and plebs. The situation as we find it right now is more like this. The vast majority of people are blue. Note that I include in the blue number all establishment right-wingers and all centrist anti-woke types like James Lindsay. Let's say in 1,000 people we might be lucky to have 1 or 2 people we might realistically say are red. My first proposal is that these people and folks, it's you. It's literally you watching this. It's you, Dave. It's you, Charles. It's you, Don. It's you, Yiz. All of these people who are red must be levelled up, both in terms of learning and in terms of becoming your best self. If your understanding and ideological commitment is currently at 6 or a 7, you should strive to make it a 10. The first step must be to create a vanguard of 10s. A 10 is not Jordan Peterson or James Lindsay or Dave Rubin. A 10 is someone who has total commitment, total rejection of the lies of the enemy, total embrace of the teachings of the red way and not the blue way. This is a rare person and a difficult thing to achieve because, recall, all the waters we swim in are blue. A 10 doesn't care about what a blue thinks of them. A 10 doesn't try to win favour with blues. A 10 doesn't try to convert a blue. A 10 does not react to the blues. A 10 does not work to attract the attention of the blues. A 10 should see the blues as one might see a horde of locusts or killer bees. They are virtually mindless drones who will behave as they have been programmed to. A 10, despite being surrounded by the ashes of civilization, knows what is good and true and righteous. A 10 has such a unity of mind, body and spirit that they have the inner strength to stand upright even as they are surrounded by locusts. A 10 is so completely red that he or she can be nothing else. A 10 will understand that not everyone can be a 10, and as soon as something becomes mass or plebeian, it will deviate from its core and dilute itself and open itself up to subversion. This is a point the distributist made. If the idea of being a 10 is, quote, cringe to you, you'll never be a 10, in which case you should go back to Fresh Prince and forget about all this. It wasn't for you anyway. At the same time, as we grow such 10s, decentralized nodes of pure redness around the world, they can network with each other, they can set up goods and services for each other, create art and culture for each other, made by 10s and for 10s. Don the Pleb asked how the left managed to do what they have done over the course of 100 years. To start with, this was how. Rogue elites, totally committed, decentralized and networked around the world. As I said, this is things as I see them right now in April 2021. I made this because I thought an interesting conversation was going on and I wanted to throw in my own 2 pennies. I can't speak for anyone else. So let me know what you think of my assessment and my ideas, and hopefully the conversation will continue.
Buy Foundations of Writing on the Academic Agency. To write clearly will help you to think clearly. The ability to communicate ideas in lucid prose is foundational to success in many areas, and it is a basic requirement in every walk of life. You will learn the parts of speech and come to understand the core functions of the English language, sentence construction and syntax, punctuation, style, and common mistakes. Once you see how mistakes are made, you will not unsee them. You will know for the rest of your life. Foundations of Writing. Buy it now.
Be sure to like this video and subscribe, and if you really like my content, maybe consider joining the channel or donating, or maybe even buy a mug. I am grateful for all of your support. Now get out.
Last week, BLM leaders threatened a national uprising over vaccine mandates. This was not covered at all by most outlets of the mainstream media and received next to no amplification by the blue checkmarks who had supported BLM in smashing up, burning and looting major city centres about a year ago. In fact, it was only covered by 3 media outlets in the world: the Daily Mail, Russia Today and Fox News. How could it be that the media simply do not care about what the once mighty and influential BLM have to say anymore? Aren't BLM major power brokers now? Well, no, they never were and they never will be. They are a pure tool of the elite to be used and discarded as one might use and discard a hammer or a screwdriver. This is a superb real-life demonstration of C.A. Bond's Juvenalian model of power. To explain the basic concept, there is always a centre to power around which constellate subsidiaries and peripheries. Now, the idea is that the centre increases its own power, which always leads to more and more centralisation, by forming alliances with the peripheries to attack the subsidiaries. In a medieval setting, this might have been a king making alliances with peasants and foreign merchants against the nobility or the church to bolster his own power. According to Bond, who draws on and refines Bertrand de Juvenel's magnum opus on power, this is how power has always functioned: an alliance of the high and the low against the middle. However, it is a mistake to believe that the periphery has any power or influence of its own. Here's Bond. At times, it is this central power which aligns with the periphery as a means to strengthen itself and weaken the subsidiary power centres. At other times, it is the subsidiary power centres which engage with the periphery to undermine and overtake the primary power. Whatever section is aligning with this periphery, it should be noted that without this alliance between a power centre and the periphery itself is basically irrelevant. Without the assistance of a centre of power, any action by the periphery is, by virtue of lacking institutional embodiment and political protection, at best sporadic and ineffective. A popular protest, rebellion, or any other form of dissenting action by the periphery, if it has no support from an element in the power structure, will quickly fade into irrelevance. If it does have this support, it will find itself supplied with resources, exposure, protection, and institutional embodiment. And so we come back to this lame cry of the BLM leader bleating racism against the vaccine mandates in New York. Amplified by none of the press, beyond the lowest status publications, ignored by power. If BLM decided to come good on their threats of violence, they'd be quickly crushed by the system like ants. And in sharp contrast to what happened last year, when the centre clearly supported BLM, showered it with funds, and forced people at various institutions to support them on pain of being fired, as some of us know all too well. In fact, later in the book, Bond explains the full extent to which BLM had always been astroturfed by elites. In 2014, ready for the 2016 cycle. He uncovers a letter from the Open Society Foundations, which is funded by George Soros, that notes that the US Programs Board approved over $650,000 in opportunities funding to support BLM back in 2014. He uncovered the Ford Foundation donating more than $100 million to BLM during the same period. Of course, in the past year or so, we saw practically every company pledge millions of dollars to BLM. But of course, practically none of this money reached the useful idiots you see pictured in these headlines. This is not new. It was ever thus. Bond shows how the black civil rights movement in America, we're talking Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks and all of that, was entirely astroturfed by elites. Martin Luther King was backed by millions of dollars by the likes of Nelson Rockefeller and, according to Malcolm X, certain Jewish Americans. Malcolm X has the following extraordinary passage. He says, "A philanthropic society headed by a white man named Stephen Currier called all the top civil rights leaders together at the Carlisle Hotel, and he told them that by you all fighting each other, you are destroying the civil rights movement. And since you're fighting over money from white liberals, let us set up what is known as the Council for United Civil Rights Leadership. Let's form this council, and all the civil rights organizations will belong to it, and we'll use it for fundraising purposes." As soon as they got the setup organized, the white man made available to them top public relations experts, opened up the news media across the country at their disposal, and then they began to project these big six as the leaders. No aspect of the civil rights movement was organic. The majority of black people were closer to the views of Malcolm X than to Martin Luther King. But Malcolm X received no financial support and virtually no coverage in the media. He was, as far as institutions and power were concerned, basically irrelevant, a periphery who never found a centre to support him. Yet it would be fair to say that Malcolm X resonated with the average black man far more than King. One can see this in the portion of the famous interview between Michael Parkinson and Muhammad Ali, which is usually cut out of TV replays and clip shows today.
People to move in the neighborhoods, we clean their own neighborhoods. And another thing, when you say integration, it comes under intermarriage too, right? All
Right,
been together.
right, sure.
And I'm sure no intelligent white person watching this show, or no intelligent white man in his or her right white mind want black boys and black girls marrying their white sons and daughters, and in return introducing their grandchildren as half-brown, kinky-haired black people.
I wouldn't object to that.
Well, you wouldn't, but a lot of them would.
Well, I'm sure a lot of people.
And
No, this is the point.
What I'm trying to say is this. And you don't have it. You say you don't, but you don't have it. You really ain't gonna have it. You're on the show, and you got to say that. But
that's not true.
why would you want to do that?
Because I don't think I'm any different from you. You see.
We much different.
I mean, I think society's made us different.
You know we're different. We all together.
But society's made us different.
No, not society. God made us different.
No, we're just human beings. He made all of us.
We all listen. Bluebirds fly with bluebirds. Red birds want to be with red birds. Listen. Tell me when I'm wrong. Pigeons want to be with pigeons.
But
Tell
we
me
have
when
intelligence.
I'm wrong. We should have. They don't have intelligence, but yet they stay together. We should have more intelligence than them, right? Buzzards are with buzzards. Buzzards are with buzzards. Bluebirds are with bluebirds. They all are birds, but they got different cultures. The eagles like to hang out in the mountains. The buzzard like to fly around the desert.
Well,
the bluebird like to fly around the trees and the grass.
There'd be certain problems a buzzard mating with a sparrow, wouldn't there?
What?
There'd be certain.
Right. And that's we have the problems too.
No,
I don't see no black and white couples in England or America walking around proud, holding their children.
That's because society
and going out.
That's society's fault. I mean, we've got to educate people around it.
Well, life is too short for me to be raised catching hell for something like that. I'd rather go and be my own. I have a beautiful daughter, beautiful wife. They look like me. We're all happy, and I don't have no trouble. No trouble. I ain't that much in love with no woman to go through all that hell. Ain't no one woman that good. You understand?
I understand. Yeah, I do understand. I understand. I think it's sad that
it ain't sad because I want my child to look like me. Every intelligent person wants his child to look like him. I'm sad because I want to blot out my race and lose my beautiful identity. Chinese love Chinese. They love the little slanted-eyed, pretty brown-skinned babies. Pakistanis love their culture. Jewish people love their culture. A lot of Catholics don't want to marry number Catholics. They want the religion to stay the same. Who want to spot up yourself and kill your race? You a hater of your people if you don't want to stay who you are. You shame what God made you. God didn't make no mistake when he made us all like we were.
I think that's a philosophy of despair.
Despair.
I really do.
It ain't no despair.
Number
one, can't no woman. Let me tell you something. No, I'll tell you. Listen, no woman on this whole earth, not even a black woman in Muslim countries, can please me and cook for me and socialize and talk to me like my American black woman. No woman, and last is a white woman, can really identify with me and my feelings and the way I act and the way I talk. See? And you can't take no Chinese man and give him no Puerto Rican woman and holler about we're in love and you emotionally in love and physically, but really they're not happy because she's gonna hear some Puerto Rican music, he's gonna hear some Chinese music, and they're gonna be clashing all the time. It's just nature. You can do what you want, but it's nature to want to be with your own. I want to be with my own. I love my people. That's all. I don't hate nobody.
Now, Ali and Malcolm X had fallen out by this time. Note, by the way, how snivelling Michael Parkinson was in that interview, falling over himself to ensure that the BBC line was maintained at all times. But anyway, the basic ideas of Ali and Malcolm X are the same. In fact, the same basic ideas have been expressed by the Dalai Lama and many other people in history. People who had an essentially natural and normal conception of life. It is only fruitcake modern liberals who dissent from this view. But to come back to Bond's model, it is the fruitcake modern liberal who controls all of our centres of power. If we were to map modern society onto the model, it would look something like this. Note, the centre is very, very big. It is not simply the government or the state or the people who hold office right now. It is a vast apparatus of interlocking institutions, the result of over 200 years of intense centralisation, which have practically eradicated the liberal distinction between public and private institutions or the state and the corporations. Let us list some elements of the centre. Government, permanent civil service and bureaucracy, police, military, central banks, any global corporation, any establishment media organisation, any state-funded educational establishment, the United Nations, the World Health Organization, NGOs of any sort, well-known charities. That's a pretty big centre. And on top of that, they have more or less dominated and conquered other subsidiaries that might have provided resistance to their power, such as, for example, Christian churches of all denominations, as well as traditional institutions such as the royal family that might have had some residual flex. Thus, the constellation of subsidiaries is reduced since the centre has been so phenomenally successful at subverting and capturing any and all resistance. And the peripheries, which are minorities and astroturfed activist movements of all kinds, speak for themselves. But this presents us with a problem, because if Bond's Juvenalian model is correct, the only way out of this would be for us as members of the subsidiary group, because if you look at what is left, if you look at the subsidiaries and replace, you could easily replace subsidiaries with white people. That is basically what is left. It is just normal white people trying to live their lives, owning small businesses and so on and so forth. Well, if you look at what is left, the only option is to ally with the peripheries and to attack the centre. Now, according to the Juvenalian model, there is no other option. So that means our potential allies are, well, Muslims, the black community, Latinos of any sort, Asians, disaffected LGBT types, and so on and so forth. Now, I have floated these ideas before, and I have always received significant pushback for it from friends. I realise that many friends think the problem is specifically anti-white and anti-Western. But the globalists fundamentally hate all humanity, all tradition, all peoples. When you're up against Sauron, elves and dwarves must fight together, put aside their petty differences for the time being. This is not even a question of whether this is desirable. It is absolutely necessary. I am not suggesting some peaceful kumbaya, let's all be friends bollocks. I do not care in the slightest if you have reason to dislike any of the periphery groups for any reason. But the globalists will destroy them just as it will destroy you. The globalists use the peripheries, be they black people, Muslims, LGBT, whatever, almost as a wizard in a video game might use summoned monsters. If you direct your energy and anger at the summoned monster, the evil wizard is just going to keep on summoning more while lobbing fireballs at you. We need our own summoned monsters, and to focus all our attacks, all our energies, all our focus on the wizard. I'm not saying that we need a formal alliance with any of these other groups, but rather that any opportunity to reorientate their ire against the centre is one we should take. Unless we start thinking like this, soon the globalists will achieve complete domination. They are very close to taking the entire map. Don't let them distract you with talk of counter-jihad, black versus white, straight versus gay, or whatever else. Don't fight the useful idiot, the Astroturfed activist. Don't fight the clueless foot soldiers. These are action points and spells and energy wasted on summoned monsters. Stay laser focused on the centre. Who funds the activists? What are their aims? What expansion of power will result in them achieving their aims? You must get out of the habit of imagining that any part of the system, the centre that is, has your back against the peripheries. It doesn't. Understand the full extent of the friend-enemy distinction. The government is not your friend. The permanent civil service and bureaucracy are not your friend. The police is not your friend. The military is not your friend. Any global corporation, even if they are your employer, is not your friend. Any establishment media organisation is not your friend. Any state-funded educational establishment is not your friend. The UN is not your friend. The World Health Organization is not your friend. NGOs are not your friends. Well-known charities are not your friends. Don't look to these institutions for help or support. Do not look to them for solutions. These are the people funding and controlling the problem. I am not saying, for example, that individual policemen or your typical military grunt are bad people. Just as I am not saying that your typical corporate employee or civil servant is a bad person. Many of those people are likely watching this video. It's probably you. And I'm not saying that you're a bad person. I am saying that these institutions are rotten to the core. They are the power centres of the enemy, beyond salvation, beyond hope of reform, as long as this system stays intact. Short of complete regime collapse, there is no saving them. Therefore, understand the map. There can be no potential alliances with these institutions. Your available allies are on the periphery. There is nobody else. Anyway, let me know what you think. I realise that there'll be a lot of disagreement about this video, but I think I'm just telling you the things that I believe. And so in recent videos I've been trying to lay bare my own thinking, and it always, I'm aware, creates a bit of debate, but I encourage that because I think these conversations need to happen. I have a sale on at the academic agency at the moment, which will get you 25% off all courses apart from Foundations of Research, which is so cheap that it's practically free, but it's worth doing that one, the research one, and the Trivium at the very least, to level up your core skills, research, writing, logic, rhetoric. These are all very important at the moment. Also worth getting Foundations of Politics on pre-order because it's going to be unique, and I'm hoping that that's going to be a pretty important course going forward, because all of this stuff I've been talking about and much, much more will all be in there as well. All right, get out of here. Be sure to like this video and subscribe, and if you really like my content, maybe consider joining the channel or donating, or maybe even buy a mug.
I am grateful for all of your support. Now get out.
Hello everyone. Today I jotted down some thoughts on dialectics on Telegram, and I thought I would record them just to get everybody's opinions on what I'm thinking about at the moment. I'm talking about dialectics and I'm talking about strategy. Now, owing to time, I don't have any fancy graphics or anything. This is just kind of off the cuff, as it were. But when I did a video like this around Christmas time, people seemed to like it, so I'm experimenting with doing more videos of this kind. So let's make a start. I have become interested in the dangers of dialectics and how a strategy based on Julius Evoler's no dialogue might work. Essentially, you want the enemy to enter into dialogue with your points, but to treat the enemy only as a creature to be studied under a microscope. There are two types of dialectics that favour the enemy. Let's label these progressive and subversive. In the progressive dialectic, they simply put a stupid idea out there. Let's say, I don't know, 11-year-old boys transitioning their sex, and allow a discourse to arise around this issue. Here, any reaction, positive or negative, fuels their cause. In the subversive dialectic, on the other hand, they instead seize on some positive principle that you or your society holds sacred. Let's say the First Amendment in the USA, and then they'll work to reinterpret that to mean the opposite of what it once did. So in the case of the First Amendment, it may be something like hate speech is not free speech, something like this. Now, when the principle is evoked, it works on two separate layers of meaning, i.e., when they say free speech, they actually mean something different from when you say free speech. And you've seen how that works time and again when it comes to words like racism, sexism, you name it. Now, in both cases, the correct response is something that I cannot repeat here. But since we live in a time in which that won't be possible, the correct response has to be no dialogue. As Evoler said, there is no compromise with subversion. The principle of no dialogue means that you never answer their BS. It simply does not warrant a response. Your own moral framework is correct. You debate with friends to refine your own points, but the enemy is only there to be destroyed, even if it's in the very long run. Now, the inverse of the above is the dissident dialectic, whereby the system is continuously forced to respond to our talking points. A neat example of this was seen recently when, trending on Twitter, there was this fact check that said the COVID-19 vaccine is not linked to neurodegenerative diseases, fact checkers say. I mean, I hadn't heard anybody claim that in the first place. So, I think it's kind of strange that they're now putting out that fact check, if that makes any sense. I believe things like this only serve to damage the enemy. Who controls the media? There's no way for the regime to answer that question that doesn't further dissident ends in some way, and so on and so forth. So no dialogue, get the message out and force them to react to us, and never vice versa. And here are some final thoughts on dialectics, 5 key points now that I've laid out. Number 1, in poker, there is a mental state that people get into called tilt, whereby discipline goes out of the window and the player increasingly goes for broke, making ever more rash decisions. This, believe it or not, is a tendency of the type of people who tend to run the media, especially when they feel cornered, and it can be observed all through history. I believe that the more this state can be induced, the better. Number 2, Joel Davis is right that the regime attempts to play no dialogue with us, but it has shown that it simply cannot help itself, quote, debunk, fact check, and so on. I believe every time they do this is an own goal, and that stuff, when they're doing the fact checking, has negative persuasive power. That is, it actually puts whatever it is they're trying to debunk
into the mind of the reader. And this is something that actually Donald Trump used to his advantage time and time again. And it seems that they have not learned from it in 4 or 5 years now. Third, coming back to those who control the media, theirs, as opposed to the generic leftist tendency, is towards total destruction of the enemy combined with a total silencing of opposition, to the point where they are just cartoon villains that nobody would ever read, a la Moustache Man and Co. Our goal should be to exploit this tendency by attempting to ever expand the range of things they attempt to label with this cartoon villainy. I'm talking about Rolling Stone attacking NoFap as some sort of Nazi trope, or some weasel journalists attacking, Bronze Age pervert and his gym bros as fascist, this sort of thing. I'd lean away from playing the villain a la Rockwell or Spencer as much as possible and lean into things that will make it seem absurd to the normie when they inevitably lash out and attack us. Fourth, direct engagement with their ideas, with their arguments, and so on is not only a waste of time, but also actively harmful. This, I'm afraid to say, is Sargon, still a friend of mine, reading CRT and trying to use it back on them. I even see it a little bit in a different form in the kind of white nationalist circles when they attempt to play a white grievance politics. They use kind of victim narratives about white people not being able to get welfare and so on. This is where dialectics are dangerous, as you slowly transform into them, as Labour transformed into Tony Blair and as Tory transformed into David Cameron. There is already a dialectic in the two-party system in which both sides are totally controlled. The regime is now in the process of doing this to what was once the alt-right and the alt-light, as well as to its official public faces. It is expert at co-opting and containment. This is why I continue to caution overly getting invested in any single narrative, for example COVID, since this is what the system can deal with best. Boomer truth and its moral frameworks must be overturned entirely. There is no winning through their system. And finally, fifth, I've noticed a lot of conceptual confusion since COVID started over the issue of freedom. Liberal democracy is their system. This simply means rule by merchants who use the smokescreen of democracy to mask their oligarchic powers and the legal fictions of liberalism to provide protections for themselves. In this system, the media is used to control the populace through heavy propaganda. This system is and has always been totalitarian. Spengler is very good on this, writing as long ago as 1918. Contra liberal teachings, it does not leave you alone because it cannot leave you alone. People trying to get back to the 1990s or even the 1950s have to get it out of their minds that people were, quote, free back then. The workings of the system are just more visible to us now. There can be no freedom through their system. Theirs is the freedom to be propagandized to by rich men. Many COVID activist boomers end up arguing for freedom with reference to the Nazis, as if the West, from 1945 to 2019, was some bastion of liberty. You must disrupt this frame whenever you see it. If they lied to you about this, what else did they lie to you about? Point out, for example, that George Orwell was writing about Britain in 1948 based on James Burnham's ideas from the managerial revolution. Boomers railing against COVID are prime to have their entire worldview overturned with some well-placed pills. All right, thank you very much, folks. Let me know what you make of this in the chat. I'll just try to find some pretty patterns or images to go over while I'm talking. Treat this like a video essay. All right, now get out.
Foundations of Physics is now available on the Academic Agency.
The course is tailored to anyone interested in understanding the basics of Newtonian mechanics while strengthening their skills in algebra, calculus, and data processing. By signing up to Foundations of Physics, you will gain access to 9 lectures on forces, motion, momentum, energy, and rotation. 9 illustrative, practical experiments that can be conducted using commonly available materials. More than 100 practice problems, curated and arranged to expand your knowledge step by step. And most importantly, instead of half-baked explanations by bored professors or graduate students conscripted into being teaching assistants, you will receive personalized responses to any question you might have about the course material. Foundations of Physics is an intensive training program that requires you to put in a solid effort. By doing so, you're guaranteed to sharpen your analytical skills and knowledge of the material world. Sign up today on the Academic Agency.
This is Jim, just smoking his pipe one nice day. He's heading to his shed to pick up a trowel, to dig up some weeds. Ah, nice day. But no! What's this? It's Colin! He claims that the shed is his. Now there is conflict. Now in conflict drama is born. Now we witness the birth of narrative. Now we are invested. Now we care. Now we can take a side. Now we can see who is friend and who is enemy. Now we can determine who is good and evil. Now there is purpose. Now there is meaning. Here we see a man. It is just a man. But what's this? Now we see that the man is not tall. What's this? Now we see that the man is not short. He is of average height. We cannot understand the tall man as being tall without the first man. We cannot understand the short man as being short without the first man. We cannot understand the height of the first man at all without either of the other two. We define each not by what he is, but by what he is not.
I think the main thing of propaganda is what Goebbels repeated at all times. The secret of propaganda is to simplify complex or complicated things, to make them as simple as possible, as simple that even the less ingenious man can understand what I mean. Simplify. And then, if you had found the form which tells a complicated thing in the simplest way, when you have found this form, then, secondly, repeat it every day. Simplify and repetition. That's the secret of modern propaganda.
Clear them out. Clear out. Clear them out. You've got to clear them out. You've got to clear them out as well. There needs to be a new start.
Repeat it.
Clear them out.
Repeat it every day.
You've got to clear them out.
Repeat it.
You've got to clear them out as well.
Repeat it every day.
There needs to be a new start. Clear them out.
Repeat it.
Clear out.
Repeat it.
Clear them out.
Repeat it.
You've got to clear them out.
Repeat it every day.
You've got to clear them out as well. There needs to be a new start.
Now, the chap that you saw being interviewed about propaganda there was a German and a former Nazi called Fritz Hippler. He may have seemed kindly, but he directed one of the most notoriously vicious pieces for Goebbels' propaganda machine ever made. A film called The Eternal Jew. I will show you just 2 small clips of how this film absolutely demonized its targets.
Erkennen, dass hier ein Pestherd liegt, der die Gesundheit der arischen Völker bedroht. Richard Wagner hat einmal gesagt, der Jude ist der plastische Dämon des Verfalls der Menschheit. Und diese Bilder bestätigen die Richtigkeit seines Ausspruchs. Wo Ratten auch auftauchen, tragen sie Vernichtung ins Land, zerstören sie menschliche Güter und Nahrungsmittel. Auf diese Weise verbreiten sie Krankheiten, Pest, Lepra, Typhus, Cholera, Ruhr und so weiter. Sie sind hinterlistig, feige und grausam und treten meist in großen Scharen auf. Sie stellen unter den Tieren das Element der heimtückischen unterirdischen Zerstörung dar. Nicht anders als die Juden unter den Menschen.
Now, it goes without saying that I do not endorse such a message whatsoever and utterly condemn the actions of the mid-century Germans. But the question from the point of view of the propagandist is this. Did it work? Was it effective? Did it help to whip people up into a frenzy of anti-Semitic sentiment? It is entirely uncontroversial to say that these methods absolutely did work. In fact, it is the official narrative of the Boomer Truth regime that the Germans were brainwashed by this propaganda. Indeed, so effective are they that Hollywood movies have used the same methods the other way around for decades, only for the purposes of depicting the Nazis as subhuman monsters, which we see again and again and again and again and again. Or how about those filthy southern types who lost the Civil War?
Where are you going, city boy?
Now, I need not remind anyone watching this how much anti-white propaganda there has been in the media these past few years. For example, this NBC writer seems to have forgotten who we were meant to be hating this week. You must understand that the negative vision is the most potent political weapon known to mankind.
Nothing the party does is good. Even the war itself is good. The party wants you to believe the end of the war so as to channel your emotions away from their rightful target. The president is not. He is a foolish, the real rulers of the state. Fish with manipulators who, because they are not take the real
There's a real unity in hatred. It helps to bring a group together, to overlook divisions, keep differences and distractions at bay as the outpouring of anti-outgroup sentiment overwhelms whatever in-group contradictions there might be. It took less than a week for the media to turn its tame hordes of masked NPCs into crazed anti-Russians frothing at the mouth with bloodlust and calling for nuclear war. Thousands of people cheered on a US senator as he called for the assassination of Vladimir Putin. But of course, this wouldn't have happened as quickly as it did if they hadn't had a lifetime of anti-Russian propaganda in the movies.
The Russian towers above the American. It's a true case of David and Goliath here. It's unbelievable, the condition of both men, but the Russian champion...
I must break you.
We will not attack if you do not run. We do not want to hurt you.
Somehow I don't believe him.
I order you to come forward, and you will be given a fair trial. Drop your weapons and remain where you are.
You got any ideas?
See, I hate you fucking Russians. You're all crazy, and you're arrogant. Now, the Irish, we came here for a piece of the American dream. You people come over here to steal it. So fuck all of you.
You think you can kill me with little needle?
People require permission to express their hatred for the designated outgroup, the political enemy.
Our political enemies are the globalist elites. Not specifically this man or that woman, this group or that group, this party or that party, this race or that race, but the globalist elites. They stand for everything we hate, and we are defined by all that they are not. So, friends, I say we must harness this power for ourselves. You must give yourself permission to hate the globalist elites. You must give others that permission. Your message should always focus and rebound, always and inevitably, against the enemy and for the friend. Foundations of Politics, only £350. Buy it now. See the world as it is and not how it ought to be. History is the graveyard of aristocracy. Who says organisation, says oligarchy. Who decides, who interprets. The extremes of individualism and socialism meet. That was their predestined course. Foundations of Politics, only £350. Buy it now. Be sure to like this video and subscribe, and if you really like my content, maybe consider joining the channel or donating or maybe even buy a mug. I am grateful for all of your support. Now get out. Hello everyone. In this video I want to try to estimate the total dissident population of the West. But in order to do that, I need to have a few heuristics, a few metrics, in order to measure who actually counts as a dissident in 2022. Now, I've listed here a number of things that people might use as a heuristic. Supported Brexit, for example, supported Trump, opposed to woke, opposed to BLM, unvaccinated, or in the current Ukraine conflict, whether you are neutral or pro-Russia in your stance, marks you out, obviously, as a dissident. Now, just a quick note, for the purposes of this video, vaccinated means at least one dose. So you count, for the purposes of this video, as unvaccinated if you had none of the 3 shots at all. If you had one, you count as vaccinated, okay? And I think it's important to use that metric because it pushes all our numbers on the more conservative side of the estimate, which is, I think, usually a good practice for these sorts of things. Now, I want to go through each of these metrics for who counts as a dissident and whether it will still kind of buy you dissident points in 2022. So supported Brexit, for example, well, Boris Johnson supported Brexit, Michael Gove supported Brexit, they're literally the government. Many Tory boys supported Brexit. Lots of people supported Brexit who, since 2016, have shown themselves not to be dissidents at all. I think the British system has successfully co-opted and contained whatever dissident energy was brought up by that Brexit vote. So I put a big fat cross next to Brexit. If you supported Brexit, I'm afraid to say that alone is not going to give you dissident status in 2022. Also, the same goes for supporting Donald Trump. Now, back in 2016, there was a huge amount of energy around Trump. This all culminated with the stuff around the election on January the 6th, as we know. I think if you're still of the mind that there was some shenanigans in the 2020 election, that will win you some dissident points. But all in all, I think that the whole MAGA movement, the Trump thing, has become too mainstream. Basically, 74 million people, don't forget, voted for Donald Trump in 2020. And it is obvious that there are not 74 million dissidents in the USA. So you do not count as a dissident if you supported Donald Trump. Similarly, if you are opposed to woke, this does not mark you out as a dissident in 2022. You know, Douglas Murray, who is clearly not in any respect a dissident, is opposed to woke. I mean, Piers Morgan is opposed to woke. Tony Blair has come out and said that he is opposed to woke. So I do not think that opposition to wokery marks you out as a dissident in 2022. And similarly, opposition to BLM in 2020, even though it had personal costs for many of us, does not in 2022 mark you out as a dissident for the same reason. In fact, BLM as an issue seems to have died a death and probably will continue to be a non-issue until the Democrats in America need to wheel them out again to cause trouble, possibly in 2024. That's usually been the case with Black Lives Matter throughout its existence, to be fair. Still doesn't excuse, of course, the awful behaviour that we saw in 2020, the riots, the corporations walking in lockstep, the media pretending that they were peaceful and all of the rest of it. But so fast are the moral panics, so quick are the crises and news cycles that 2 years on, it's basically a non-issue. In fact, there was recently a story here in the UK where some black activist was trying to complain about unfair treatment, got no news coverage, nobody cared, wasn't on the front pages, couldn't get any traction whatsoever. So BLM, for the time being, is a non-factor. But next, being unvaccinated, having resisted 2 years of propaganda, straight, huge amounts of social pressure, a concerted media campaign, censorship, and all the rest of it, huge draconian measures taken by governments, to still be unvaccinated in 2022, I would suggest, marks you as a dissident. That is, if you refused all 3 shots, you didn't get a single shot, that marks you out, in my book, as a dissident in 2022. And then the issue of the moment, the current huge issue, is, of course, the Ukraine conflict. And this has been quite overwhelming. I mean, here in the UK, there are little pretty conservative villages close by to where I'm sitting right now, where, places that you imagine may have voted Brexit, for example, places where there's not a lot of wokery, places where, I'm talking about a rural area where you're still seeing the Ukrainian flag being flown, small businesses putting Ukrainian flags in their window. This is an issue where the centre-right or the establishment conservatives have really taken a very strong pro-Ukrainian stance, same in America, same across Europe. So, the normie conservatives, if you want, the Tory boys, they're 100% anti-Putin, anti-Russia, 100% on the Ukraine side of the conflict. And I would say that the social pressure, the political pressure has been as intense, if not more intense, than the stuff around the pandemic. So I would say, yes, being neutral or pro-Russia on the Ukraine conflict marks you out as a dissident in 2022. So now we've got 2 distinct measures that we can look for. And it just so happens that there is pretty good data on how many people are unvaccinated. As of March 2022, it took me quite a while to source this data,
but 15% of the US population are unvaccinated. That is, they haven't had a single shot. And 9% of the UK population is unvaxxed. 25% of the European Economic Area, so that's the EU plus Sweden and a few other countries. I wanted to include the Scandinavian nations in this, so that's why I've gone with the EEA and not the European Union. But 25% of Europe basically is unvaccinated. I was a little bit surprised by just how large that number was, and I'll come back to that in a moment. 15% of Canada is unvaxxed. That surprised me. More Canadians unvaxxed than British, and a whopping 20% of Australians are unvaxxed. I mean, considering the draconian measures taken by the Australian government, that's a huge number. I just couldn't believe how large those numbers were compared to the UK. I mean, basically Australia has double the unvax rate than Britain. So, you know, when it comes to dissidents, just on this one metric alone, the UK doesn't have, you know, has noticeably fewer than the others. Now, just on this European front, I was pretty surprised. I thought the Europeans would be much kind of hotter on being compliant, but there is a general trend. So if you have a look at the map, the darker the number, the higher the take-up of the vax. Portugal has got the highest rate. If you have a look, it's taken at least one dose, 94%. Okay, but what surprised me is that the German uptake of the vax is a lot lower than the UK's. In fact, Germany is about on par with America. And naturally, as you'd imagine, Eastern Europe, so I've used Poland as my example there, has a much lower rate of compliance. Just 60% of Poles have taken one dose. So now, rather than break up each of the European populations, I've taken it all together because, as you're about to see, I'm going to cross-check this data with sentiment on Vladimir Putin's Russia. And obviously, in the east part of Europe, in Poland and in Czechoslovakia and so on, for obvious reasons, they have much stronger anti-Russian sentiment in those countries. So what I'm imagining here is that the strength of anti-Russian sentiment is going to counterbalance the total number of unvaxxed in a place like Poland, in terms of how I'm counting dissidents in this video. So as of that, I realize it's imperfect, but I'm taking a flat rate for all of Europe on both measures here. But in reality, of course, uptake of the vax is a lot stronger in a place like Portugal than it would be in Poland. But by the same token, anti-Russian sentiment is a lot stronger in Poland than it would be in, let's say, Portugal. Okay, so let us continue. This is the total adult population of unvaccinated then, using those percentages. And I think it's worth being aware of the total numbers of people because it's easier to visualize, okay? So the total unvaxxed population of the US, 38.5 million, just about. The British population, 4.8 million. Across all of Europe, 90.6 million. Canada, 4.6 million, which is really very surprising when you consider that the UK has, you know, many more people, and yet the unvaxxed population of Canada is almost as big. So that kind of surprised me. And then in Australia, there are 3.9 million unvaxxed. So, you know, sizable numbers when you consider it in that way. Although,
as we'll see, when compared with the total population, obviously it's going to be a lot smaller. Now, coming on to the second part, stance on Russia. Now, I was looking for a kind of metric that we might use, and this one coming out of Canada. This was a kind of survey done in Canada by some company or other, where they were looking at attitudes towards Russia by vaccine refusers, essentially, by the unvaxxed. And as you can see, they asked, I believe Russia is committing war crimes in Ukraine. Do you agree or disagree? And what was interesting to me is that of the unvaccinated people, 32% actually agreed with that statement. In other words, even though they were unvaxxed, they were going along with the media narrative on Ukraine. And immediately to me, that tells me you're not a dissident, basically. It means that the vaccine was some special issue to you, but when it comes to something else, you can be misdirected by the strength of the media and by the strength of social pressure. That is, you're not solid on both issues when it comes to opposing the empire of lies. And, whether people agree or disagree with that, I think needing both is quite a good, strong, revealed preference metric. Okay. Now, the other significant thing about this is that, so I'm just to mention, I'm taking 42% as the constant number of unvaccinated people who oppose the media narrative on Russia as well. And I'm taking that as a constant across all countries. Okay. Now, even though this was Canada, I think it's quite not a bad place to benchmark it against, because one might imagine that the number in America, for example, might be bigger than this. Okay, because Canadians, as a whole, are a bit more liberal. They're a bit more compliant. They're a bit more left wing as a nation. So I think that's not a bad baseline, the 42%. Now, there have been a number of these studies done. This is another one, for example. And if you have a look, in this one they said respondents who said they received 3 or more shots, respondents who said they were unvaccinated down the right-hand column. And basically they were asking, well, what action should be taken against Russia? These are Canadians as well. Maybe it was the same study. Obviously they went through issue by issue, but none of the above, 52%. So we can see that, anti-Russian sentiment accounts for about half of unvaccinated at the very least. And I think 42% is a nice conservative estimate of how many of those unvaccinated are truly dissident. So using these two numbers, I have calculated the total dissident populations of each of the countries. So in the US, we're looking at about 16.1 million. In the UK, around 2 million. Chances are, if you're one of those 2 million, you're watching this video and you're subscribed to this channel. Although, there must be quite a sizable number of people out there who are in this 2 million who don't watch us and who are not actually recognizably part of what is known as the dissident right. Who those people are exactly, it's difficult to tell. Maybe a larger number of them are subscribed to the Lotus Eaters or Sargon or Akkad, for example, but it's only 2 million people. Then across all of Europe, it's 38 million people, total dissident population.
Quite a big number, quite a lot, but obviously they're spread across many different countries. So you'd have to go into each individual nation if you wanted to do this very thoroughly and try to work, using the same methodology, you could work out, well, how many are there in Germany, for example. However, given that I'm using a constant rate of 0.42, you can pretty much quickly work out that, well, Germany had around the same unvaccinated population as the USA. It was about 15% unvaxxed in Germany. So you're looking at quite a decent chunk of, a decent number of Germans. There'd be more Germans who are dissidents than British, for example, which may surprise some people. Then we're looking at just under 2 million Canadians. Again, a much bigger number than I was expecting coming into this, and about 1.6 million Australians, which is sizable given how much smaller the Canadian and Australian populations are than the British population. And I would just wanted to represent these numbers as a percentage of the total adult population so that you can have a look at a glance. Well, how many dissidents are there? Incidentally, it is said that in order for a revolution to occur, at least 3.5% of a population needs to be on side with the revolutionaries. Okay, now that doesn't mean that all 3.5% of that dissident population have to actually be part of a revolutionary group. It just means that that's the minimum number that is required for there to be, revolutionary change. I'm not suggesting that's going to happen. I just think it's an interesting metric, considering the numbers that we're looking at here. So I'll just go through them. 6.3% of the American population, 3.8% of the British population, a whopping 10.5% of the European population, which very much surprises me, it has to be said. I mean, on paper you'd think, well, you'd imagine the Europeans to be a lot more compliant than that, but they actually haven't been. I was having a look at France, for example. About 20% of French are unvaxxed. And they have people like Zemmour and Le Pen running there. So maybe we shouldn't be too surprised, but that's a tenth of all Europeans count as dissidents. I wouldn't have thought that before I made this video, to be honest. Canada has the same rate as the USA when it comes to dissident population, 6.3%, and Australia, quite sizable, 8.4%. And again, coming into this video, a lot of people might think, well, Canada, Australia, these are cucked nations. They don't have a will to fight, but that's, it's actually Britain that has the least number of dissidents in the West, as far as I can tell. The UK is the most compliant, most cucked, if you want, of all the countries. So that is, I would say, a little bit surprising or will be surprising for a lot of people. Now, I just wanted to present this data because I was interested to kind of estimate, how many people are out there. I'm just a scholar. I am not a political activist in any way, as people know. But I thought that this data could be useful. It could be useful for dissident groups, for example. It also could be useful for the UK government to think about these things as well. There's a value-free analysis. People can do with it what they will. If you want to help support this channel, I am selling courses on the academic agency. Foundations of Politics is the newest one. There's the mega bundle. There's all my different courses, the trivium and so on. That's the best way to help me, not only because you help me keep this channel going, but also because you get something back, many, many hours of learning to help people kind of just level up in their lives in general. You can also join the channel.
join my Substack. That's another subscription. Buy a mug. But most importantly of all, ladies and gentlemen, get out.